Okay, here we go. Welcome everybody to our first The Call to Awakening panel, dedicated to the topic of activism and shadow work today, one that has been very much in the heart of our project and is continuously showing up and spoken about also in our little group. So I'm really excited to be here today with Samir, Mick, and Coco to speak about the topic. And yeah, welcome to everyone watching on Facebook. And yeah, I won't give a long introduction, but hand it over to Samir really quick to maybe say a few more words about the project in general.
Yeah. Hi everyone, thank you for joining. My name's Samir. I'm a filmmaker, and last year with Julian and Katie Mottram, we created what's now a series of films, initially as a response to the pandemic. The idea was to look at what was going on in the world and kind of reflect on that. But over a series of 16 interviews, what came out was more of a collective narrative. And it became a story about individual and collective awakening, a story about how to handle uncertainty. And what I noticed was that interviewees were always coming up with similar ideas, a choir, you could say, around certain topics. And so we've done a couple of screenings of the first two films with some really good responses and feedback. And we thought we'd open it up and start taking out certain topics that came up again and again and again, and just show the clips and then bring the interviewees to discuss the topics. So today, we've got Mick Collins and Coco, who are both amazing interviewees who are in the film. And the topic that we are talking about today is shadow work and activism. So to start off with, we're going to show you a clip of the film, and then it's about 3 minutes. And then after that, we're going to have a conversation about this topic, which is shadow work and activism. Then after that, we're going to open it up to you guys to talk and question. And at the end, we'll have a conclusion. Julian, is that right? Is that about it? Yeah. And Coco and Mick will introduce themselves after the clip is shown, and then we can go into a discussion about shadow work.
All right, and here comes the clip. If I start, maybe give me a little sign if you can see and hear it well.
I think really the work at the moment is what the Jungians would call shadow work.
Trauma is felt and stored in the body, and it's forever seeking a way to be released and a way to be voiced. This old suppressed pain is just wanting to be heard.
The shadow in Jungian analytic psychology are all the aspects of the self that we have denounced, the things that we are and we think we're not.
We have to embrace our emotions fully in order to integrate that fragmented part of ourselves, in order to truly have compassion for ourselves and for another.
This is old trauma that is wanting to be released, and if we project it onto another, then we're just perpetuating the same cycle.
And we can only hold space for another person at the depth that we have gone to within ourselves. Doing this deep work expands our capacity to be compassionate to another's healing.
I'm very much into creating safe spaces where people can authentically speak from their heart, to be able to voice all your emotions.
Where people are supported to be able to have a time out and to reflect on their life and connect with themselves.
And so how to create an environment that's open and inviting.
Find someone who you know you can be true with, that isn't going to judge your emotions as something that needs to be bypassed or transcended.
You provide maximum freedom, but within a container of maximal safety.
So if we were to be able to create a space and have different kinds of experiences that would allow the human being to begin to imagine what is it within them that they could change.
But the benefits both for ourselves and for the world as a whole are potentially paradigm shifting.
So before we start the Q&A, I just want to say that firstly, the topic is about safe spaces, but the clip also, the topic's about shadow work, but the clip also talks about safe spaces, because I began to understand the two are very linked. And so when I was making or editing the film, I put that in one section. And the other thing, which I think both myself, Julian and Katie discovered along the way, was that shadow work is actually quite an important topic that a lot of people don't like to talk about and may not include it in their own personal journeys, or they may skirt over the topic, but actually it's something that needs to be talked about. And also the addition of the idea of safe spaces, shadow work can be held. So it's not something to fear. And because these films are an ongoing conversation for the three of us, we're not saying that we are kind of giving you a objective view of how the world is. We are learning as we do this process. So these Q&As and these conversations are going to come back, going to help us create better work in the future. So please give us your feedback and please let us know what you think. But we're not actually saying that we are giving an objective truth. This is our journey. So that's how I want to set that out. And then I also want to now introduce Mick and Coco, and maybe they can introduce themselves. So shall I start with Coco?
Yeah, you can do. Hi, everyone. I'm Coco Oya, CNRA, and it was so nice hearing my voice in the film. And I met Julian and Samir and Katie, was it just over a year ago? It's like time warp, at Katie's event, Emerging Proud. And I spoke about my own journey with the dark and the shadow then, and it's become a key theme in the work that I do and who I am as a person now. And it was an honour to kind of be part of the films. And I feel that working with the shadow is, it's an imperative part of being spiritual and being whole and being who you are. And I'm not sure how much you want me to say now, Samir, or do you want to introduce me first?
Yeah, I'll introduce Mick and we can go back to that. Hi, Mick.
Hi,
how are you doing?
Great, thank you, and thanks for inviting us today, and good to be here. Yeah, I'm really pleased to be having a contribution in this discussion, because my own journey started in 1986, when I met the shadow in its entirety after living in a Buddhist monastery for a few years. And all manner of stuff came up that I had no idea about. And it took me on a journey that I'm still on, so there was no quick fix to this. This is a long-term journey, but nonetheless, as Coco said, there's an imperative here to this work. And I think those of us that have been through shadow work we're living testimonies to that fact. And so my journey took me from living in a monastery to then training as a health professional, and then sort of going on and doing the work, integrating it in my professional and personal life. So I still feel very connected to that journey, because the shadow, there's always stuff that you see and there's always things to be revealed, because it's our relationship to the world, to the outside, the other, and the inner. So the inner and the outer go together. So yeah, it's ongoing and necessary.
Thanks, Mick. Julian, do you want to add anything?
I think that was a wonderful start. Just maybe just sharing the gratitude and joy to really, yeah, also to hear your voices in the movie and have you here. It's just, it feels really powerful. I'm really happy to dive in deeper in the shadows now.
So why don't we start by talking about what the shadow actually is? I know it's mentioned in the clip, but I'll start with you, Coco. In your opinion, or in your experience, how would you define what the shadow is?
Okay. The shadow is all the parts of us that we hide, which we don't project out into the outer world. And often they are parts of us that we have been shamed or have been demonized. And unfortunately, I feel that a lot of the shadow is our truest self that is hidden in the dark. And it is shamed because we live in a social construct that has a very narrow view of who we are meant to be as humans, which is we hide our emotions, we hide our feelings, and they are the things that get pushed into the shadow, into the dark. But what we misinterpret about the shadow is that it's the place where new life can grow. The shadow is held in the dark. All new life grows in the dark, whether that's seeds or babies. And so for me, reframing what the actual shadow is, I don't often use that word now, the shadow, because they are just aspects of ourselves that we've held in the dark. And for me, as a devotee of the dark feminine, it's something that's supposed to be loved and embraced. So when we have the connotation or we say shadow work, I think you mentioned it, Samir, that there's often a fear held around that. And so I'm trying to change the language around what the shadow is and just saying that they are just parts of us that we've held in the dark and there's nothing to be afraid of, because it's just us. It's just us, parts of us that we have misinterpreted as being shameful or harmful or not welcomed. And so part of what I am here to teach is not necessarily, it was interesting listening to myself when I was saying about creating safe spaces, because as I'm evolving, I'm realising that the safe space is within the self. I can't create that for another person. What I can do is help them find safety within themselves so they have the resilience and the resourcefulness and building a capacity within themselves to hold their own things that they've hidden away in the dark so that they can then birth that within themselves, because that's what the process of bringing the shadow into the light is, a rebirthing process. And we are doing that individually now, and we are doing that collectively now. We are currently in a very collective dark night of the soul. And so this is the work that needs to be done. And my work around that is to reframe the shadow as something that is here to be loved. It's ready, it's time, it's ripe to reframe it, rather than something that is heavy and something that is fearful and something that we, run away from or bypassed, as you use the word. It's something that holds our potential and our power. And if I hadn't, on my own journey, realised that, I would still be suffering from depression or anxiety around that. But what I've learned is that it's where my purpose has come from, it's where my passion has been birthed, and it's where my fullest potential is growing each and every day, and each and every day that I speak about the shadow.
Thank you. Mick, do you want to add anything?
I thought it was great, Coco. I love what you said, and I totally agree with you. And for me, the image that came up when Coco was speaking was a tree. And, we don't sort of have a downer on roots that are going deep down into the earth. We actually can't have a tree with its beautiful canopy, and Coco spoke about the fruit of the work. Yeah, That's part of the fruit, and the seed gets its nutrition from the roots. So, if we think about the tree as a symbol of the work that we're doing, both are needed. And so that you can't, the sad thing is that the shadow gets demonized, or it has been, and thankfully for all the good work that's happening now, we're getting a different narrative. And, there are, I'll just put in a little bit, there are scary elements sometimes when you, the unconscious, the reason it's called the shadow is it came from a term by Carl Jung. It just means that something's unconscious, we're unconscious of it, but it's just bringing our awareness to that that's the issue. And the idea that the shadow works autonomously unless we bring awareness to it. So the idea then is that the shadow, if it's left unattended, can be the architect of splits and separations and projections. So I can start othering people if I have no awareness of what's going on in me. So by bringing awareness to the shadow, I can then bring that energy that's being projected out and reclaim it, and then, like the tree, put it into growth, rather than, something that's not good for society or self. But for me, there are scary elements to this. And when I met the shadow, I'd had a pretty weird upbringing. And when I met the full glory of the shadow, when it came up, and I was doing a tantric practice in the monastery, and there was nothing written about this. This is before Stan Groff's book was published. I met a murderous pile of impulses that came up in me. And it freaked me out. I've got to be honest. It freaked me out because I had no idea what was going on. My everyday identity had no notion of this. So therefore, everything I knew about myself was being challenged by this transpersonal encounter. So it took me quite a while to get into that and realized that I was possessed by the unconscious, and it had a life of its own. Now, I had to do a lot of work in unpicking that. But one thing I learned from Carl Jung is when you meet the unconscious, don't panic. That's the first thing. Don't panic. This is just a process that needs awareness. And I think Coco represented that beautifully. It's just a process that needs awareness. And when you enter that awareness, you're then re-energizing, you're reconnecting to that vitality for living. Then the canopy can grow. These central sort of nutrients from the shadow then get held in the canopy and the fruits. So beautiful. We should be embracing this work. There's just one thing I want to say. The reason where I think the shadow gets a bit tricky is because of, and Coco mentioned this, the societal attitudes, the consensus reality that shapes our views of what we are. So for someone like me who saw a pile of murderous impulses, straight away it activated my critic. I'm bad. So what do then? You're then caught with your own self-condemnation whilst also trying to have something that's vitalizing and wanting to be cleared. So when you got those two opposing forces working in you, so a lot of the time, if you're having a heavy process like that, you've got to do some work on your inner critic, get that out the way, and then be available to withdraw your projections from your shadow and reconnect to that energy for your own source of individuation or self-actualization. And then you've got a room to move. So I think the two things for me there are watching where the critic can get hold of that narrative and taking care of that too is important. So anyway.
Thank you. So I want to first tackle this perception of the shadow that people have, that it's something that is maybe dangerous to encounter, or I know we talked about the fear. Some people might say, if you're going to go to if you're going to do shadow work, you have to be very careful. You have to work with a professional therapist, which may be true. But what I want to ask the both of you is if we reframe the shadow as not fearful, is there a framework that we can start to create in society where people can tackle the shadow on their own? Or does it really require to be held by a professional, someone trained? What are your thoughts about this, Coco or Mick?
I believe ultimately, as time goes on this journey, we can do this ourselves. But as Mick pertained to, I also had initial fear when my shadow came up, because there was lots of deep trauma that I'd suffered in childhood that I wasn't aware of until it started presenting itself. And yes, I did need space. I did need someone to hold space for me while I dove into those deeper places, because it is an inside journey. But one of the reframings that really helped me, or frameworks, was the analogy of nature, and Mike kind of spoke to that as well, that we have cycles in nature. If we look at the tree, and there is in that a cycle of death and dying and decay. But because in society we have we kind of gloss death over, but ultimately, as I've said, we're in a dark night of the soul, and death is being presented in our faces, and we have to look at it. And because it is kind of glossed over, when we are in the dark night of the soul, or shadow work, or whatever you want to call it, this sense of death that comes up, this sense of identity that has to die, often can get again pushed into the shadows, because we as a society don't want to talk about death. We don't want to talk about the darker aspects of society or of ourselves. We want to gloss over. So I think the awareness that needs to come first is the fact that the shadow is the things that we hide in society that we want to gloss over. So someone has to have an awareness that, yes, there may be parts of us that come up that are murderous traits, or traits where our sexuality is skewed, or traits where we want to harm ourselves, or just images where they may seem very dark, but they are just a sense of our humanity. So I think what needs to come first is an understanding of what wholeness means, what it means to be a whole human, that we have dark and light, yin, yang, death, decay, and birth and rebirth. We have to incorporate all aspects of the cycle of life in someone's understanding first, and then they can successfully start embracing the shadow, because they sense then that it's just an old sense of identity that's dying, or they are confronted with an aspect of their identity that has been skewed into something dark, because it got pushed so far away from the light of who they are that it becomes distorted. But the more that we do the cycles and go through the cycle of death and rebirth, those parts of us become more subtle, more in the light, more incorporated, more integrated, more, and we can embrace them more. And there we see that it's nothing to be fearful. It's almost like the seeds that are held in the dark have so much power and capacity. And we've seen what happens in the world if power is like suppressed and distorted, it becomes destructive. And that's why the process can sometimes feel destructive, because once we tap into those seeds that have been buried and the power of that comes out, it can feel overpowering, it can feel overwhelming, because everything wants to be, wants to come into the light. So when I say creating safety within someone else, my kind of thing now is all about embodiment, and as I've said, creating that capacity and to have an expanded field so you can hold what's coming up. And that's the work that I'm all about, embodiment. My path also started on the tantric path, and it was the tantric path that awakened me to the shadow also, which is I find quite interesting, because the tantric path is all about embracing all of life. There is no bad or good in tantric. It's all just life. It's all just a part of life. So yeah, helping someone reframe the fact that life is neither good nor bad. It just is an experience of human. We came here to experience the whole of humanity, and not just gloss over. So that's where the framework for me has to begin, reframing how we view humanity so we can embrace the shadow. Because as Mike said, that if we don't, all those projections we see out there around death, around war, around murder, where do you think they come from? They're just projections from ourselves that we've created in the outside world, because we've been taught not to embrace those aspects of ourselves, or not to embrace the power, the true power of what they are. So they become distorted out in the world. And that's the work that wants to be done. If you want to talk about activism, that is the activism work, the inner work.
Mick, thank you.
I thought
Mick.
that was beautiful, Coco. I love the way you said that, and it totally fits with where I see this work as well. You know, death. We live in a sort of a society that's sort of almost so avoidant of death that we're becoming so hyper vigilant about keeping it away. Yeah, it's the very source of life, as Coco said, the cycles and the rhythms that we're in. And if we're keen to even become activists, you can't avoid the point of actualization. You must embrace that, because otherwise you'll go bonkers. You know, to be an activist means you're going to individuate. To individuate means you're going to die. You're going to have to die, because whatever beliefs and ideas you had about yourself and society, and whether you're a good person or a bad person, all those polarities that we live out and judgments of others and all that fitting in, is going to have to die. And there's no way around that. And so the idea of, embracing death and working with that perspective is fundamental to activism, I think, if we're really going to embrace this. I think there's not much more I can say. It's just going to repeat a lot of what Coco said around that. But for me, there's this connection to that we're always in potential. We're always seeking to individuate and grow. And as a society, we've not embraced that either. We've got great education, and we have a health service, and we have all these opportunities, particularly in the Western world and in the industrialized world. But even that has its own problems, because the industrialized world is created through industrial complexes, pharmacological, agricultural, chemical. These are complexes that are surrounding our lives, but we've also become part of that industrial complex. So internally, we have industrial complexes working in us. Now that's tricky, because once you start to individuate, you're not then going to start siding with the consensus reality that's against your own wholeness. So then you've got to make a bit of a stand. Then you've got to decide who you want to live as, who you are. And sometimes that means you've got to say no to the narrative that's telling you to go this way. As Jung said, which I quite like, he said, you can ignore your individuation, but it'll just grab you and drag you along the street by the scruff of the neck. You cannot shake that off. Your dreams will start to track you. Your synchronicities will start to haunt you in a way. Things will start popping up again. Your individuation, your wholeness is not just a particular egocentric driven activity. It's fundamental to life becoming whole within itself. That's really what we're talking about here. So death, yes, because whatever ideas cultivated this notion of me and who I think I am as a young child, all the introjections and ideas I was given are now redundant. So what are you going to do with that? And these are the crux questions. So as I read the other week in this, one of these, I can't remember the person's name, but he said the work is just learning to die, really. Just learn to die and accept that.
Thank you, Mick. I think I want to open it up as we continue to the audience. If you have any questions, please ask as we continue the conversation. So does anybody have any questions or any thoughts? Feel free. Alan?
Okay, just one. I mean, I agree with everything that's been said, so I don't feel I've got much to say, to be honest. But just one comment. A really positive thing about the shadow, it can create the energy for people to want to make positive change, and in that sense, that is positive. But as you say, the problem is that if people haven't done their own work, then it can get projected, and it's us against them. So that I can think of someone I know, a young woman in the 20s I work with, who's a great activist, but it's also them. So the shadow's doing positive stuff, but also not such positive stuff. But I think what you all said is yeah. Totally agree.
So thank you. So talking about activism and shadow work, Mick, Colin, I'm sorry, Mick, Coco, and also you, Julian, just thinking about the passion and the energy that creates activism. If we were to deal with our shadow and if we were to embrace it, do you think that that passion and that motivation might change? So to give you an example, if you're passionate about the environment or you're passionate about certain types of rights, that can be driven by a sense of oppression or rage or anger. If we hold that anger and deal with that anger and it dissipates, then what happens to motivation within the activist role?
Good question. Well, I've got a take on that, Coco, if you're happy to, or unless you want to go first, up to you.
I'll just say that the word activism doesn't resonate for me anymore, because I used to think I was an activist. But as you've said, Samia, it changes once you start coming from a different place, from the inside out. Because what I realised for me was activism or anti this, or I'm anti-establishment, or I'm anti-something, was all about the fight, was all about fighting them out there. Because I didn't want to look in here. I was fighting myself, to be honest. And so since that shifted, because it was about, killing a thing or something wants to die, but it was my own internal self that needed to die. And as Mike said, my motto now is die well and die quick. And just die well.
Yeah.
Let's get in the cycle of, this is what life is about. It's a cycle of dying and rebirth. And so, yes, I do think the momentum shifts, and that I've stopped the fight. So now it's all about just embracing fullness, embracing this, like, I can't remember, I think Alan said, this capacity to grow, because that's what it is. And we are in this evolution process, individually and collective now. And this is what's happened. It's all that potential that's been held. It's just gone. And we're having to face every single shadow, all at once now, because we've just held this potential in place because we're too busy fighting and being, anti this, anti that. So yeah, the momentum and the perspective does change once we shift from internal to external, rather than fight externally and then come in.
Lovely. For me, the word activism, yeah, I mean, if people ask me and say, "Are you an activist?" I say, "Yeah," but you won't see me jumping around a lot. I'm not a hot activist. I do it quite coolly in the background. But I'll write a book, and then it'll take me 3 years to get a point across, and then I'll go and talk about that at a conference or something. That's how I do it. We're all different. But for me, the more important thing is that the word act, as in actualization or activism, is a verb. And if you really want to get into this grammatically, a verb means you do something or something gets done. And that doesn't always have to be outwardly, as Coco said. This is a very powerful inner injunction. The doing that's happening, it's not you doing it sometimes. Individuation is about, so for instance, there's this wonderful saying, the unconscious isn't unconscious. It's just that consciousness is unconscious of what the unconscious is conscious of. Right? It's a bit of a joke, really. But essentially what it's saying is, don't you think that all of your consciousness, your smartness is the only position? There's a lot more going on. And you see that in dreams. The dreams that show you something about your situation, the world dreaming that brings something to a head. It's not like the Aboriginals would say on the song lines and the dream time. There's so much about what we're in this industrialized world that we live in, is marginalized that so much that we have to then be truly authentic in our doings and following the doings that are happening within us and tracking that and following that honestly and authentically. And for me, the path of shadow work naturally follows as a form of activism to eldership. And that is almost, you cannot separate those two in my estimation. And if you want a good illustration of that, Just look at Nelson Mandela. Yeah, 27 years locked up for wanting to be a freedom fighter. 18 years of those were in really hard labor, and the rest of the time was in confined to a house. But when he actually came out of there, this is the person that had been doing his inner work. When he came out, he not only became president, he invited his white prison guard to his inauguration. That is not othering, that's embracing. That was powerful. Then he became a world elder, because the whole world went, hang on a minute, this guy's got something good. Yeah, because he did his work. He did his work. He was locked up, but you couldn't lock him up. You couldn't lock him up. It's impossible. He was doing his work. So, you know, I mean, yeah, it was a tough call. Don't get me wrong. I'm not marginalizing what happened to him, but he did the work and he actually transformed himself. And then look what happened. You know, there's a spirit that just came to fruition. That's eldership. He could easily have come out and wanted to get the Molotov cocktails going because of his experience, but he didn't. He actually embraced. And when he put on the number 6 jersey of the Springboks at the World Cup final, which is the Springbok jersey was basically the symbol of white apartheid. When he put that jumper on, he just said, I'm here for all of you. He didn't need to say it, he did it. So it's a verb, he acted in that way. I mean, what a gift, what a gift. And if you need an illustration, just look at, I mean, no one's perfect. And I'm sure there's things Nelson Mandela did that might be tricky, I don't know. But what he went through and what he shows us is a real power of doing and following that inner doing as well, following that deep desire for wholeness. Yeah.
So would I be correct in saying that activism could be shadow work, that true activism could be inner work?
Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. And I love that analogy because it is a state of being. And when we are in that state of being, we can then, it's almost like we're constantly then in a state of the unknown, of following the next step rather than charging forward into action to annihilate. It comes from a deeper place. It comes from, I say, a place of the soul, because that to me is what shadow work is. It's a journey of reclaiming soul in the body and emanating from that place. And so we do operate differently when we've done and embraced our shadow work. And for me, that's what my activism is. And it's funny because I've become now, instead of being a charger out there, I'm also a writer now. And that's how I get my message out into the world, to do my little bit of activism. But it comes from a more silent place. And I'll say it comes from a deep place for me. And it's all about this hidden part, or the part that we've left behind in society, which is from a feminine aspect. And when I say the feminine, I don't just mean frilly. The dark feminine for me is also Kali energy. You know, she will cut things down if it's necessary. She is fierce and she's formidable. And so that's the place that I work from. But it's it's just that place of the feminine, the unknown, the void, the deep, the place of emotion, the place of intuition, all those places that we don't necessarily speak from in the kind of masculated world out there, but are now coming into the forefront. And it's the place that I believe that activism will evolve into, because it needs to. It really, it's time for it. It's time for that shift, and that's what we're evolving into. That's how I feel anyway.
Yeah, lovely, fantastic. I agree totally. Yeah, I mean, I think we're all singing from the same song sheet here, which is great because, you know, we don't know each other's work so well, but, you know, we're both tuning in on the same vibrations. And I think that's what's happening. People are coming to these questions with the help of others, sometimes on their own. And you know, I mean, when I started this journey, there was nobody I could speak to about this in 1986. It was like, you know, you would have just got a psychiatric diagnosis. And so I stayed away from that. I was lucky enough to meet a psychologist who'd worked very closely with Krishnamurti. And he just said, you know, if you can get through this on your own, I recommend you do that, because these powerful things and the projection of this murderousness, you know, you could see that where I was going to end up. And so it took me 2 years on Social Security to get through that. you know, just to hang out and dig deep and trust that something here was trying to happen. And that narrative, you know, him saying those words, he saved my life. But, you know, this idea that somehow we've been so cut off in this industrialized world, we've been so chopped by virtue of our potential, and this connecting to this intuitive, this dreamlike, this nurturing sense, and also that powerful sense, as Coco said, of that inner feminine. To me, the soul is feminine. It always has been, you know. I don't have another language for it apart from it's she, you know, it's she. And, you know, to treat her and to connect with her in a way that really gives her respect. And that isn't also, I also embrace that masculine element, that like there's an inner marriage that happening between the two. And I was very touched when you read the Gospel of Thomas from the Nag Hammadi library. So a lovely old quote from Jesus in there. You know, when the inner is as the outer, when the above is as the below, and when the man and woman are the same, then you'll know the kingdom, or, well, I call it the queendom, or the whateverdom. But it's all about that non-duality and that integration. And so, you know, this is the work we're in at the moment, and it is soul work for sure. Absolutely soul work. And just one thing I want to add on that, we spoke a little bit about knowing, and I've always been keen to try and integrate the connections between our ways of knowing, our ways of being, our ways of doing, and our ways of belonging. You know, that we need that whole life perspective. And the root meaning of the word knowing comes from conscience, and consciousness means to know. So, you know, how we investigate our conscience and our consciousness is part of this deal too. So, and then what do we do and be with that new knowledge? That's the invitation here. And it's, I'm excited by it. You know, I don't feel like, you know, I just think this is amazing. Wow. You know, let's get it on. Let's do it. You know, I mean, this is what we're here for, isn't it?
I'll high five to that, Mike. I'm with you all the way. There's so much potential.
Me and you are in the same club, Coco.
Yeah. You know, this is the rising of she. You know, that's how I see it. The rising of she, the rising of soul. And this is what we are birthing into this new era, into this new world. And it feels frightening to a lot of people because we're not used to talking about soul or depth or feeling. But this is where we have to go to be whole as humans. And there's, you know, the river is running. There's nowhere to hide. It's going to happen. We're on our way. So join the party, as I say.
That's lovely. Can I just add one thing there? You know, it's funny, we keep going backwards and forwards to death and soul, which is one of my favorite, well, two of my favorite subjects. So, you know, but one of the things that really supports what we're saying here is that people's near-death experiences. When people have near-death experiences and they haven't given much thought to anything else but satisfying their personal appetites and desires and what have you, you know, because that's what we've been led to believe is a good life. But when people die, they're often confronted with actually the things that they did get rebounded back to them. So they feel the consequences of the actions of what they did on others. So again, the verbing is very important here, what we're doing. And all of a sudden there's a shock wake up. It's like, oh my Lord, I didn't realize this is what it was all about. So we can actually learn from those studies about people's experiences when they've had these near-death experiences. And what is interesting, you don't get any quicker transformations happening than when people have had near-death experiences. Some people react to them and don't change because it was just too overwhelming. But many, many people come back and have profound insights and profound transformations. Well, that tells me something that this is real and we should take notice of it. And so the second thing is, if we don't do the work now, we're going to have to face it at the end of our lives based on that research. And my favorite little story that I love, just very briefly, is in Mount Peninsula of monasteries, and it's a male structure. It's all male monasteries. It is what it is. But there was a story I came across about one of the ascetics, and they just lived death every day. And one of them lived in his little hut overlooking a cliff, and just back on the little patch of earth, he dug his own grave. So every day he came out, he just saw his own grave and just remembered, yeah, what are you here to do? And I so love that. I just thought, wow, that's, put it in your face, you know, die to your history that's no longer serving you and wake up to your potential that's trying to happen.
We have 10 minutes left, so I just want to ask a few more questions in these last 10 minutes. Firstly, if we're considering shadow as being important work, and that is perhaps our true activism, on a more social level, what can we do in our social structures or even in policy to create systems where we can actually start to deal with our shadow in a safe way?
I'm happy to say something about that,
Yeah.
unless Coco,
Yeah.
you want to say something?
No, go ahead. I'm still.
Well, the first thing that I think needs to happen, I'm sorry to be prescriptive, but I think it does. Both Coco and myself have said we lived and grown up in a society that's neglected these potentials that are actually part of who we are. They're fundamental to who we are. So the first thing we need to do at a policy level is for education, health, industry, you name it, everywhere, universities, to sit down and start waking up to what a human being is, and forget about indoctrinating people into a certain ideology around what they think life is, and that a good life is going out and earning a shed load of money and having a big car. Well, hang on a minute, who says? What about educating people to wake up so that you'd have people like Coco who were working in a university to actually run sort of sessions for people to start working with what their dreams and potentials are for how they want to bring their knowledge forward. They might be studying to do medicine. What sort of medicine would you like to practice? And that might involve a little bit of shamanism. Let's embrace a bigger idea of what evidence means rather than just a randomized controlled trial. Let's have evidence that looks at what makes you feel better. And studies around that now are coming out. I just met a guy like a year or two ago who from Harvard, who's now looking at research like that about wellness and the things people do to make themselves better against the odds, and people do get better. So let's open this up and bring people in that have got the idea of empowerment and enablement for a bigger embodiment.
Yeah, embodiment is a key word, and I'm not really into policy anymore, but if I had to make a policy, it would be from the very beginning, when we're educated as children, that to teach children that all of them is welcome. All of them, every ounce of them is welcome. The good, the bad, the ugly, the joy, the sadness, every single human emotion that they have is welcome. And that we all learn in different ways. And I learned through movement, I learned through daydreaming, and I got told off horrendously and criticised as a child for always being moving, always moving. And always daydreaming, but that's how I do my work now. That's how I channel the feminine. You know, I sit and I move and I meditate, and it's coming back home to yourself. So something in teaching from a very young age, it's okay to be individual. It's okay to find your own rhythm. It's okay to not conform. You know, to be yourself, to be the wholeness that you are. That's what needs to be implemented from a very young age, and it needs to start from, you know, kindergarten. You know, children aren't designed to sit on chairs for 8 hours a day. They're meant to explore life. They're meant to feel through the senses. They're meant to touch nature. And they're meant to be out in daylight, not under artificial light. We are human. We are like nature. We are plants. And like I said, those seeds that needs to be nurtured, if we kept a seed in the dark, you know, and didn't nurture it fully, it'd just wither and die. And that's what happens to us. Our potential dies, we wither away. And so we need to reform from an early age the education system. That's the first place I'd start, because then we'd have healthy children growing into healthy adults, and shadow work wouldn't be necessary, would it? Ultimately, but it is now, and so it's a lot harder to to do as an adult, because, you know, our sense of identity is hardwired, and that's why there's the crack, you know, the full crack. And like Mick said, I had a near-death experience that kind of woke me up to the fact that, holy shit, I'm living a complete lie. And that was my journey into shadow. So, and also policies need to be made as in any kind of setting around the fact that this is part of life, because we've created structures where people are going to have breaks and people are going to have issues with their mental understanding of who they are. And to create, and if that happens, don't expect them to just carry on with everyday life. We need to create spaces where, like Mick said, it took him 2 years. It's taken me twice as long as that. And I've only understood that process of being in the dark that long because someone said, oh, you're like bamboo. Bamboo grows, doesn't come above the ground for 4 to 5 years. It creates a root structure and then it springs forth. And that's what we kind of need to teach in life, that when we have these breaks, they're not psychotic. You know, I was diagnosed with so many different mental illnesses when all it was that my potential wanted to come out. And so within structures around mental health, if we can see that all people need is a space to find themselves and to be held and to be shown that it's okay to grow in your own capacity. Those are the kind of policies and structures that I'd like to see evolve now, because it's, like I said, it's inevitable. It's going to happen as this energy rises on the planet. More people are going to come into realization that they're living in a structure that isn't, you know, up to human consumption, let's say. You know, it needs to die.
It sounds to me like what you're saying is that education is quite an intellectual attainment, but we need a place for us to handle our emotions.
Yeah.
And currently there isn't a structured place. It's meant to be the family, but not everyone is going to be able to express their emotions in their family.
No.
So perhaps these spaces need to be created so that people can express all their emotions from a young age in a safe way.
Yeah.
So we've got a few minutes left. I want to go to the audience and just ask you, do you have any questions for anyone?
May I just say that I think this has been a very interesting discussion. I've spent many years in palliative care nursing, and there's a beautiful study out. It's probably about 15 years old now, by a professor called Balfour Mount, who's a professor at McGill University, and he looked at his patients as the teachers, and what was it that they showed us towards the end of their life. And it's called 10 Commandments of Healing. But at the heart of it, there were 10 different ways of looking at it, but it was about very much present moment awareness. It was about trust. It was about attending to your whole person needs. It was about celebrating life, as Mick says. And his view over the whole 10 thing was meditate. Meditation brings you back to you. And if this is done in a safe, supported space, be it in your own home or with others, and we know the power of that with others, then you find yourself. And so really, it's very simple, but also incredibly complex finding that. So yeah, I think the discussion about the shadow side and how we can each let go and grow is a very, very valuable for all of us, every one of us. So thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just respond to that? Thank you for that. It's so beautiful, and also palliative care, that touches me a bit as well. And I worked in that field just for a very short time when I first qualified. But there's one thing that really just raked up for me, a memory of the study now that's coming through with people's end of life dreams and visions. And you know what? We're talking about shadow work now while we're assuming we've got time left. Who knows? But people that are at end of life often have dreams and visions that are about finishing up the business of their life and getting closure on some bit or awakening to another bit. And formerly they used to be classified as delirium, and they would medicate these people to settle them down because they were chatting to some entity in the corner of the room. And now there's a much more open approach to that. And it feels to me like we're beginning to change and recognize that something's trying to happen in the psyche, even at the end of life. And if we can just bring that fast forward that now and bring that to our general hospitals, our schools, as Coco said, and just trust it, because it's what we're about, it's what we need. But thank you for saying that. There's really...
Could I add on to that as well, Mick, is not only at the end of life, as people talk and witness this endlessly amount of times, but also the children are the purity of their consciousness. They're with the unseen to us. And again, this is what Coco says, is accepting that we lost something along the way. It was conditioned out of us. And to go back there at both ends of life, beginning and end, and really embrace that, because all of us are going to go there one day, aren't we? There's no getting away from that. Yeah. And as a new life comes through, let's see what they have to tell us. Thank you.
I said to my daughter, I said about my granddaughters, I said, listen, if they start talking to angels and you can't see them, I said, please just let them carry on. And she said, oh, it's funny you say that now, because I saw her looking across the ceiling the other day. I said, who knows? Yeah.
Thank you. So I think Julian, we've hit 1 o'clock. Are we ending it here?
We can end it here, but maybe we can do a last round of sharing.
Okay. Okay, shall I start?
Everybody is happy to stay on just a few minutes longer.
Yeah. Coco, do you want to summarize?
Just firstly, I've loved this discussion, and it's just really cemented just how important shadow work is to our growth and our potentiality. And I hope it becomes something that more people speak about, and it becomes a natural thing to speak about. That's my hope and that's my wish.
Thank you. Mick?
Yeah, I think there's something for me about having been influenced by the work of Carl Jung, who I think was someone who brave enough all those years ago to start talking about this stuff in a really, in a way that was very public. But just to say, he spoke about the spirit of the depths and going down as a big part of the work. So the descent is a really important step. And rather than it being linear from descent to ascent, this shade light duality thing that we've got to dance with for our awakening, he just said, well, it's like we just got to keep going around things like a circumambulation. But each time we go around, we get more clarity, and then that knowing emerges. So there's a descent and an ascent that's happening in a circuitous way. And for me, that's the kind of like the depths and the enlightenment that grow together rather than just a linear thing. So for me, it's about a journey, and I've been doing this now for 35 years, and I just keep waking up all the time to new insights. And I think, wow, I didn't know that. And I find it extraordinary and beautiful, So rather than just a quick fix or a straight line, take time, go around it, have conversations, sip tea, dance, whatever, But it's got its own rhythm.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mick. So I want to say thank you, Mick Collins, Coco. You've been amazing, and thank you for being in the films. Just if you want to watch the films, the website is www.a-call-to-awakening.com. I think Julian's going to write this in the chat. And the longer versions of the films are there, and there are 2 of them so far. And we will have Q&As in the future. So if you sign up to the website, you can get notifications about events. So thank you again. And I look forward to the next time we speak. Julian?
And really thank you, Samir, for guiding us through the session, and for the questions, and for really creating and co-creating this flow.
Thank you.
It was such a rich conversation. I'm going to sit with this for a while. It has been addressing so much. It went so deep. Mick and Coco, really thank you again for sharing your wisdom and insights.
Thank you.
Yeah, looking forward to the next panels. We're going to host the next 3 panels of the Call to Awakening movies in cooperation with the Sarah McLean Institute from the 31st of March onward. I don't have the times here, but you'll also find them on the website. You'll find them on the website soon. Thank you.
So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for everyone who joined us.